Story. Story. 4. Paul's Case. By Willa Cather. Summary. Paul's Case, by Willa Cather, is a poignant short story that delves into the complex psychology of a young man named Paul, who feels stifled by his mundane life and yearns for the glamour and excitement of the world beyond. This narrative examines the clash between societal norms and individual desires, ultimately leading Paul down a path of rebellion and self-destruction. The story is set in early 20th century Pittsburgh and revolves around Paul, a sensitive and artistic teenager, who struggles to fit into the confines of his working-class surroundings. The contrast between his yearning for beauty, luxury, and sophistication and the gritty reality of his life sets the stage for his inner turmoil. Paul finds solace in his job as an usher at Carnegie Hall, where he is exposed to the elegance and refinement he craves. However, this exposure intensifies his discontent with his life, leading to his alienation from his family, teachers, and peers. Paul's detachment from his surroundings is evident in his disdain for his classmates, whom he views as coarse and uninteresting. His rebellious nature culminates in a series of events that ultimately lead to his downfall. He embezzles money from his job and escapes to New York City, where he indulges in a luxurious lifestyle far removed from his previous reality. He dines at expensive restaurants, stays in posh hotels, and immerses himself in the world of art and entertainment. However, this newfound extravagance is short-lived, as the gap between his fantasies and reality widens, and he becomes increasingly desperate to maintain his facade. Paul's story serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of succumbing to escapist fantasies and rejecting societal norms. His extravagant behavior isolates him further, leading to his inevitable downfall. As his funds dwindle, he realizes the impossibility of sustaining his desired lifestyle. The realization that his dreams are unattainable pushes him to a breaking point. The story's resolution is both tragic and thought-provoking. Paul's realization that his fantasies will never become reality leads him to make a final, irreversible decision. His tragic death, marked by a symbolic leap in front of an oncoming train, signifies his ultimate attempt to escape the confines of his life, albeit through a tragic and irreversible act. Paul's Case explores themes of alienation, the clash between reality and fantasy, and the destructive consequences of pursuing escapist dreams. Through Paul's character, Cather invites readers to contemplate the complexities of the human psyche, and the dangers of rejecting the world in favor of unattainable ideals. In conclusion, Paul's Case, by Willa Cather, is a poignant exploration of the human desire for something more, even if it means sacrificing one's sense of belonging and societal acceptance. Paul's journey from alienation to rebellion to tragic demise serves as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of escapism, and the consequences of rejecting reality for an unattainable fantasy. Cather's narrative skillfully navigates the fine line between dreams and reality, highlighting the delicate balance that shapes the human experience. A. Multiple choice questions. 1. Paul was studying in high school as a boy. A. St. Xavier's. B. St. Joseph. C. St. Martin's. D. Pittsburgh. 2. Paul was an expert in A. Telling lies. B. Solving crosswords. C. Dancing. D. Singing. 3. Paul started to work at the A. Cinema. B. Theater. C. Concert hall. D. Restaurant. 4. After the concert was over, Paul A. Followed the singer up to the hotel. B. Imagined that he is following the singer up to the hotel. C. Went his home straight. D. Wept in the hall for the singer. 5. Paul lived in A. Maple Street. B. Cedar Street. C. Elm Street. D. Cordelia Street. 6. Paul runs away from home and goes to A. New York. B. Washington. C. Chicago. D. Boston. 7. Paul commits suicides by A. Falling off a high building. B. Jumping in front of the passing train. C. Jumping into the river. D. Shooting himself on the head. Extra MCQs. 1. What is the central theme of Paul's Case by Willa Cather? A. The triumph of individual desires. B. The joy of mundane life. C. The clash between societal norms and individual desires. D. The pursuit of artistic excellence. 2. Where is the story Paul's Case primarily set? A. New York City. B. A rural village. C. Early 20th century Pittsburgh. D. Paris, France. 3. What is Paul's attitude toward his working class surroundings? A. He feels comfortable and content. B. He is indifferent to his environment. C. He feels stifled and yearns for more. D. He believes it is a perfect fit for him. 4. How does Paul find solace from his mundane life? A. Through studying hard and getting good grades. B. Through his job at Carnegie Hall. C. Through traveling to exotic locations. D. Through engaging in sports and physical activities. 5. What does Paul yearn for in his life? A. Fame and fortune. B. Glamour and excitement. C. Simple pleasures and routines. D. A peaceful and quiet existence. 6. Why does Paul become increasingly discontented with his job at Carnegie Hall? A. He dislikes the people he works with. B. He is underpaid for his work. C. It exposes him to a world he can't attain. D. He doesn't enjoy the responsibilities. 7. How does Paul's rebellion manifest in the story? A. He engages in illegal activities. B. He starts a protest movement. C. He quits his job. D. He embezzles money and escapes. 8. What is the consequence of Paul's detachment from his surroundings? A. He becomes a social outcast. B. He gains popularity among his peers. C. He becomes a highly respected student. D. He finds solace in his isolation. 9. How does Paul attempt to bridge the gap between his yearnings and reality? A. By working harder at his job. B. By seeking guidance from his family. C. By embezzling money and living extravagantly. D. By joining an artists' collective. 10. What is Paul's ultimate realization about his dreams? A. They are easily attainable with hard work. B. They are unrealistic and unattainable. C. They require a supportive family. D. They can be achieved through education. 11. What impact does Paul's extravagant behavior have on his relationships? A. It brings him closer to his family. B. It isolates him further from others. C. It helps him form new friendships. D. It leads him to reconnect with his teachers. 12. What is the climax of Paul's Case? A. Paul's escape to New York City. B. Paul's reconciliation with his family. C. Paul's final act of rebellion. D. Paul's pursuit of a career in the arts. 13. What does Paul's ultimate decision to jump in front of a train symbolize? A. His triumph over adversity. B. His acceptance of his mundane life. C. His rejection of societal norms. D. His desire to travel. 14. Which of the following is not a theme explored in Paul's Case? A. The power of escapism. B. The conflict between art and science. C. The clash between reality and fantasy. D. The consequences of rebellion. 15. How does Willa Cather use the character of Paul to convey her message? A. Paul is a heroic figure who triumphs over adversity. B. Paul represents the epitome of contentment. C. Paul serves as a cautionary example of escapist behavior. D. Paul is a symbol of societal conformity. 16. What does the term escapist fantasies refer to in the story? A. Fantasies involving adventure and danger. B. Fantasies about achieving success in one's career. C. Fantasies involving supernatural elements. D. Fantasies of escaping from one's current reality. 17. How does the story setting in early 20th century Pittsburgh contribute to the narrative? A. It showcases the idyllic countryside. B. It adds a touch of mystery to the story. C. It serves as a backdrop for Paul's yearnings. D. It highlights Paul's love for urban living. 18. What is the main lesson readers can learn from Paul's story? A. One should always conform to societal norms. B. Escaping reality is the key to happiness. C. Pursuing unrealistic fantasies can lead to downfall. D. The pursuit of art should always be supported. 19. How does Paul's experience at Carnegie Hall affect his outlook on life? A. It reinforces his contentment with his surroundings. B. It intensifies his discontent and yearnings. C. It convinces him to become a musician. D. It helps him bond with his family. 20. What is the significance of Paul's tragic death in the context of the story's themes? A. It represents his triumph over adversity. B. It symbolizes his reconciliation with reality. C. It underscores the dangers of escapism and the rejection of societal norms. D. It signifies his success in attaining his dreams. B. Short questions. 1. How does the author describe Paul? In Paul's case, the author, Willa Cather, describes Paul as a young man who is discontented with his life and yearns for a more glamorous and extravagant existence. He is depicted as being different from his peers, with an air of superiority and a sense of being misunderstood. Paul is discontent with the ordinary and mundane aspects of his life, finding the routine of school and his family's expectations to be suffocating. Cather portrays Paul as having a fascination with art, music, and the world of luxury and wealth. He is drawn to the elegance and sophistication of the theater, where he feels a sense of belonging and acceptance. Paul's desire for a grander life leads him to become delusional and disconnected from reality. Despite his intelligence and potential, Paul is portrayed as reckless and impulsive. He steals money from his employer to finance his extravagant escapades in New York City, demonstrating a lack of moral compass. His actions are driven by a longing for a life of splendor and a desire to escape the constraints of his ordinary existence. Overall, Paul is depicted as a complex and conflicted character, torn between his longing for a more glamorous life and the harsh realities of his circumstances. His inner turmoil and misguided actions lead him down a destructive path, ultimately resulting in a tragic ending. 2. How did Paul react in front of the teachers? In front of his teachers, Paul adopted a facade of politeness and respect, presenting himself as a model student. He was well aware of the need to maintain a favorable image in the eyes of his teachers to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention or suspicion. Paul understood that conforming to social norms and adhering to the expectations of authority figures was crucial in order to continue his charade of being an obedient and dutiful student. He played the role of a diligent and well-behaved student during school hours, knowing how to navigate the educational system to his advantage. Paul was intelligent and capable, and he used his charm and wit to impress his teachers, especially in subjects that interested him, such as art and literature. He excelled in these areas and earned the admiration of some of his instructors. However, behind this facade, Paul harbored feelings of contempt and dissatisfaction with his everyday life. He resented the routine of school and felt suffocated by the expectations placed upon him. This internal struggle between his desire for a more extravagant life and the constraints of his ordinary existence created a sense of alienation and disconnection from his peers and teachers. Despite his outward appearance of compliance, Paul's teachers likely had little insight into the depth of his unhappiness and the extent of his yearning for a life of luxury and extravagance. They saw him as a promising student with potential, unaware of the turmoil he was experiencing beneath the surface. Paul's true feelings and desires remained concealed, allowing him to maintain the illusion of a dutiful student while secretly plotting his escape from his ordinary life. 3. Why did Paul hate Cordelia Street? Paul hated Cordelia Street, his home neighborhood, because he perceived it as dull, common, and suffocating. To him, it represented everything ordinary and mundane, which clashed with his extravagant and artistic sensibilities. The residents of Cordelia Street were working-class people, and their lives revolved around mundane routines and responsibilities, which Paul found stifling. As a teenager with dreams of grandeur and a longing for a life of luxury, Paul despised the simple and frugal lifestyle of his family and neighbors. The street's modest houses and conservative values felt like a prison to him, limiting his freedom and potential for self-expression. He yearned for a life of elegance, sophistication, and wealth, which he believed he deserved. Moreover, Paul's perception of Cordelia Street was influenced by his own feelings of alienation and difference from those around him. He considered himself special and superior to his peers, viewing them as incapable of appreciating beauty and culture as he did. This sense of superiority fueled his disdain for his surroundings and intensified his desire to escape and lead a life of extravagance. Additionally, Paul's interactions with his father, who worked hard to provide for the family, further contributed to his negative feelings about Cordelia Street. He saw his father as a symbol of mediocrity and resented the working-class values he represented. This resentment drove Paul to reject the life his family led and fueled his determination to break free from his ordinary existence. In summary, Paul's hatred for Cordelia Street stemmed from his desire for a more glamorous and luxurious life, his sense of superiority, and his discontent with the ordinary and mundane nature of his surroundings and family life. 4. Why did Paul use the basement window to get into his house? In the story, Paul's Case, Paul used the basement window to get into his house because he was trying to avoid being noticed or confronted by his father. After his extravagant behavior at the concert and subsequent suspension from school, Paul knew that his father would be waiting for him at home, and he feared facing his disapproval and anger. Paul's father was a strict and practical man, and he did not understand or appreciate Paul's desire for a life of luxury and extravagance. He wanted Paul to focus on his studies, work hard, and lead a responsible, ordinary life. However, Paul was rebellious and felt stifled by his father's expectations. By using the basement window, Paul could sneak into the house without being seen by his father, allowing him to delay facing the consequences of his actions. He hoped to avoid any confrontation or argument, and by some time to figure out his next move. Paul's desire to escape his ordinary life and experience the thrill of grandeur led him to take impulsive actions, such as running away from home, and using the basement window was a part of this attempt to avoid the consequences of his behavior. It's important to note that Paul's actions throughout the story reflect his desire to distance himself from his family and the life they represent. He sees them as the embodiment of everything he despises, mundane, common, and lacking in sophistication. Using the basement window symbolizes his rejection of his family's values and his longing to escape into a world of elegance and luxury. 5. What kind of pattern Paul's father thinks for his son? Who was the role model for him? Paul's father believes in a strict and practical pattern for his son's life. He values hard work, responsibility, and adherence to societal norms. He wants Paul to focus on his studies, get a stable job, and lead a conventional life. Paul's father views extravagance and indulgence as frivolous and wasteful pursuits, and he disapproves of Paul's desire for a life of luxury and grandeur. Paul's father's role model is his own brother, who is described as a successful businessman. The uncle's lifestyle and career success serve as an example of the kind of life Paul's father wants for his son. He sees his brother's conventional and disciplined approach to life as the right path to follow. However, Paul is fundamentally different from his father and uncle. He craves beauty, art, and elegance, and he yearns for a life of luxury and sophistication. He finds the routine and mundane life of Cordelia Street suffocating and unfulfilling. This disconnect between Paul's desires and his father's expectations creates a deep sense of alienation and rebellion in Paul. Throughout the story, Paul tries to escape his ordinary life and immerse himself in a world of beauty and splendor, which leads to his eventual downfall. His father's inability to understand or appreciate Paul's yearnings contributes to the widening gap between them. This lack of understanding and acceptance drives Paul to seek out an extravagant and daring lifestyle, which ultimately results in a tragic outcome. The story explores the tension between the dreams of youth and the expectations of parents, emphasizing the importance of understanding and empathy in family relationships. 6. Why did Paul find himself at ease at the theater at Carnegie Hall? Paul found himself at ease at the theater in Carnegie Hall because it offered him a glimpse into the world of luxury, art, and sophistication that he craved. Unlike his mundane and ordinary life on Cordelia Street, the theater represented a realm of elegance, beauty, and high culture. Paul was captivated by the opulence and grandeur of the place, which allowed him to escape from the restrictions and expectations of his everyday life. At Carnegie Hall, Paul could immerse himself in a world of music, art, and performance, which resonated deeply with his inner desires for a more extravagant and refined existence. The luxurious surroundings, the glamorous audience, and the talented performers all contributed to Paul's sense of belonging and enchantment. The theater became a place where Paul could briefly escape from the drudgery and limitations of his working-class background. It allowed him to experience the life he yearned for, even if only for a short time. The contrast between his dull reality and the magical world of the theater made him feel alive and invigorated. Additionally, Paul's fascination with the theater was not just about the external trappings, it was also about the artistic and emotional experience it provided. The performances stirred something deep within him, awakening his imagination and fueling his desire for a life filled with beauty and passion. In summary, Paul found himself at ease at the theater at Carnegie Hall because it fulfilled his longing for a life of luxury and artistic splendor. It offered him an escape from the constraints of his everyday existence, and allowed him to temporarily live in a world of enchantment and refinement. 7. How did Paul compare and contrast his school and theater world? Paul compared and contrasted his school and theater world in the following ways. 1. Monotony versus glamour. Paul saw his school life as monotonous and dull. The routine of attending classes, doing homework, and adhering to strict rules felt suffocating to him. In contrast, the theater world represented glamour, excitement, and a break from the mundane. The opulence of Carnegie Hall and the allure of the performances were a stark contrast to the drab school environment. 2. Restrictions versus freedom. At school, Paul felt confined by societal norms and the expectations of his teachers and parents. He was expected to be respectful, obedient, and focused on his studies. On the other hand, the theater offered him a sense of freedom. It allowed him to escape the constraints of his everyday life and immerse himself in a world of artistic expression and emotional release. 3. Conformity versus individuality. In school, Paul was expected to conform to societal norms and fit into the mold of a responsible student. He felt like an outsider and believed that his teachers and peers did not understand him. In contrast, the theater world celebrated individuality and creativity. It allowed Paul to express himself freely and be captivated by the uniqueness of the performances and the people in the audience. 4. Mundane versus enchanting. Paul saw his school life as mundane, predictable, and devoid of excitement. The theater world, however, was enchanting and captivating. The performances transported him to a realm of beauty and artistry that he longed for in his own life. 5. The ordinary versus the extraordinary. For Paul, his school life represented the ordinary and the commonplace. The theater world, on the other hand, was extraordinary and larger than life. It was a place where dreams came true and where he could experience a life of grandeur and sophistication. In summary, Paul saw the theater world as a stark contrast to his school life. It represented everything he desired: glamour, freedom, individuality, enchantment, and the extraordinary. The allure of the theater drew him in and made him yearn for a life beyond the confines of his everyday existence. 8. How did Paul boast of visiting fashionable towns with his friends? In Paul's case, Paul boasted about visiting fashionable towns with his friends by fabricating elaborate stories of his extravagant adventures. He wanted to impress his peers and teachers with tales of his glamorous life outside of school. Paul would regale his classmates with stories of trips to New York, Chicago, and other sophisticated cities, where he claimed to have stayed at luxurious hotels, attended extravagant parties, and mingled with wealthy and influential individuals. In reality, Paul's tales were all lies. He had never been to these places or experienced experience the high society he described. His stories were a desperate attempt to create a false identity and escape from his mundane and unsatisfying life. Paul craved attention and admiration from others, and he believed that by pretending to have an exciting life, he could gain the admiration he so desperately desired. Paul's boasting was also fueled by his desire to be seen as exceptional and different from his peers. He felt like an outsider at school, and by creating these grandiose stories, he hoped to set himself apart as someone special and unique. He wanted to be admired and envied by his classmates, even if it meant deceiving them and living in a fantasy world of his own creation. However, as the story unfolds, it becomes evident that Paul's boasting only serves to alienate him further from those around him. His lies are eventually exposed, and he faces the consequences of his actions. The stark contrast between his fabricated world of glamour and the reality of his mundane life becomes increasingly apparent, leading to a tragic and heartrending conclusion. 9. How did Paul do shopping in New York for the first time? In Paul's case, when Paul visited New York for the first time, he experienced an exhilarating sense of freedom and luxury. He went on a shopping spree, indulging in extravagant purchases to further enhance his fantasy of living a grandiose life. Paul had stolen a substantial amount of money from his employer, the firm where he worked as an usher at Carnegie Hall, to finance his trip to New York and fund his lavish spending. During his shopping expedition, Paul splurged on high-end clothing and accessories, choosing the most fashionable and expensive items he could find. He wanted to immerse himself in the world of luxury and glamour that he had always yearned for. Paul's shopping spree was not just about acquiring material possessions, it was a way for him to escape his mundane reality and embrace the fantasy he had created for himself. Paul relished the feeling of being in a city that embodied everything he desired: sophistication, elegance, and extravagance. He reveled in the attention he received from salespeople in upscale boutiques, enjoying the sense of being recognized and admired for his apparent affluence. However, the reality of Paul's situation soon caught up with him. His reckless spending and stolen money were discovered, leading to dire consequences. His escape to New York and the false identity he had constructed came crashing down, ultimately leading to a tragic end for the young boy who desperately sought to escape the confines of his ordinary life. 10. Describe Paul's first experience at the hotel in New York. Paul's first experience at the hotel in New York was a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had run away from home to pursue his fantasy of a grand and luxurious lifestyle, and now he found himself in the heart of the city he had always dreamt about. When Paul entered the hotel, he was struck by its opulence and grandeur. The lobby was filled with beautifully dressed people, and the atmosphere exuded elegance and sophistication. He felt a sense of exhilaration, as if he had finally stepped into the world he had always imagined. Paul was acutely aware of his appearance and demeanor, knowing that he needed to fit in with the wealthy guests. He tried to act nonchalant and composed, as if he belonged there, though he couldn't help but feel a bit out of place. As he approached the reception desk, Paul tried to maintain an air of confidence while checking in. He had selected an assumed name, Clark, to further distance himself from his old life. Using this new identity, he interacted with the hotel staff, hoping to be perceived as a sophisticated guest. Despite his efforts, there were moments when Paul's facade wavered, and his nervousness became apparent. He fumbled with his gloves and worried about how he was being perceived by the staff and other guests. However, he managed to keep up his act and continued to play the part of a wealthy and important guest. Once in his room, Paul was thrilled with its luxuriousness. He admired the expensive furnishings, the soft carpets, and the overall elegance of the suite. Being in such a lavish environment only fueled his desire for the extravagant life he had always desired. Paul's first experience at the hotel was both a realization of his fantasy and a reminder of the reality he was trying to escape. While he basked in the allure of the hotel's luxury, he was also aware of the precariousness of his situation. Deep down, he knew that this was all a temporary escape, and the consequences of his actions would eventually catch up with him. 11. How did Paul manage money to go to New York? In the story, Paul's case, the details of how Paul managed the money to go to New York are not explicitly provided. However, it is implied that Paul stole the money to fund his trip. Before running away to New York, Paul had been entrusted with handling the weekly banking for his employer, Mr. Denny, at the firm where he worked. It is suggested that Paul had been stealing money from the firm over time, which eventually amounted to a significant sum. The story mentions that the exact amount of money he took was not known, but it was enough to support his extravagant lifestyle and fund his escape to New York. Paul's desire for a life of luxury and grandeur led him to take drastic measures, including stealing, to fulfill his dreams. He was discontented with his ordinary life in Cordelia Street and felt stifled by the limitations imposed upon him by his family, teachers, and society. As a result, he sought to break free and immerse himself in the world of glamour and sophistication he believed he deserved. By appropriating money that did not belong to him, Paul made a desperate attempt to create the illusion of the life he desired. However, this decision ultimately led to dire consequences and a tragic ending for the young protagonist. 12. How did Paul spend time with a San Francisco boy? In Paul's case, the story continues with Paul spending a wild night with a San Francisco boy he met in New York City. They venture out together to explore the nightlife and return to the hotel the next morning after an extravagant evening. Despite their initial camaraderie, the parting in the elevator is distant and cool. Paul wakes up feeling disoriented and hungover, but he manages to maintain his composure and conceal any suspicious behavior from the hotel management. Paul revels in the luxurious lifestyle he has adopted, finding pleasure in his surroundings and possessions. He enjoys the solitude and comfort of his sitting room during winter twilights, appreciates his extravagant clothes, wide divan, and cigarette, and feels a sense of power and self-satisfaction. The freedom from constant lying and the ability to live a life of grandeur without the need for boastful pretensions restore his self-respect. Remarkably, Paul shows no signs of remorse or guilt for his reckless behavior. He remains unapologetic and content in his newfound life of extravagance. Each day is a golden opportunity for him, and he strives to make every moment perfect. Despite the excessive indulgence and self-gratification, he manages to maintain an air of dignity and refinement, never becoming loud or obnoxious, even when under the influence of wine. Paul's obsession with the glamorous world he has embraced, and his desire for a life beyond the mundane and ordinary drive him further away from his former life in Cordelia Street. He is now entangled in a web of deception, extravagance, and a constant yearning for grandeur, creating a stark contrast between his current reality and the world he left behind. 13. What did Paul know by reading the Pittsburgh newspaper? After a wild night out with a San Francisco boy, a freshman at Yale, Paul woke up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon feeling thirsty and dizzy. He called for ice water, coffee, and the Pittsburgh papers. Despite his excesses, Paul managed to maintain his composure and not draw suspicion from the hotel management. He enjoyed his newfound wealth with dignity and never behaved boisterously. His chief indulgence was in his surroundings, relishing the quiet moments in his sitting room, surrounded by flowers, fine clothes, and his comfortable bed. He felt a sense of power and peace he had never experienced before. Notably, Paul was no longer burdened by the need to lie to be noticed and admired, as he did back home on Cordelia Street. Now he could dress the part of the person he wanted to be without pretensions. Interestingly, he felt more manly and honest in his newfound identity. Despite his extravagance, he lacked remorse for his actions. As his days in New York went by, Paul continued living in splendor, making each day perfect. On the 8th day, the affair was covered in detail in the Pittsburgh papers, indicating that the local news there lacked sensational stories. Paul's actions were exposed to his hometown, but it is not clear how he reacted to this revelation or how it affected him emotionally. 14. Why did Paul think of committing suicide? In the story, Paul's case, Paul contemplates committing suicide after his extravagant and deceptive life in New York City comes crashing down. Despite his temporary escape from his mundane existence in Pittsburgh, Paul's actions catch up to him, and his fraudulent behavior is exposed in the newspapers. The revelation that his escapade has been publicly exposed brings a profound sense of shame and humiliation to Paul. The idea of returning to his old life on Cordelia Street, where he would be scorned and seen as a failure, becomes unbearable for Paul. He feels trapped and sees no way out of his predicament. The gap between his dreams of a luxurious and extraordinary life and the reality of his circumstances becomes insurmountable, leaving him feeling utterly defeated. The story doesn't explicitly delve into the reasons behind Paul's suicidal thoughts, but it can be inferred that the immense pressure of maintaining his false identity, combined with the fear of facing the consequences of his actions, leads him to consider such a drastic measure. Paul is deeply dissatisfied with his life and feels disconnected from the world around him. The weight of his deception and the disillusionment he experiences push him to the brink of desperation. However, the story leaves the reader uncertain about whether Paul ultimately goes through with his suicidal thoughts or not. The narrative ends on an ambiguous note, with Paul's fate left to the reader's interpretation. 15. How did Paul end his life? Paul's Case is a widely distributed short story centered around a teenage boy named Paul, who is portrayed as spoiled and discontented with his mundane life. He attends school, does his homework, respects his teachers, and maintains good relationships with his friends and family, but all of this feels like a burden to him. Paul yearns for a carefree and extravagant existence, rejecting the constraints of established moral and social norms. Feeling suffocated by his ordinary life in Pittsburgh, Paul dreams of escaping to a world of opulence and grandeur. He is infatuated with the theater and luxurious lifestyle of the actors he encounters, viewing them as symbols of the life he desires. Paul is drawn to the allure of wealth, beauty, and glamour, considering them the keys to his liberation. Paul's dissatisfaction with his reality drives him to make reckless decisions. He steals money from his employer, feigns sickness to skip school, and ultimately runs away to New York City with the stolen funds. In the bustling city, Paul indulges in the extravagance he has always craved. He stays in luxurious hotels, buys expensive clothes, and attends grand parties, embracing a lifestyle far removed from his previous existence. However, Paul's pursuit of a hedonistic life comes at a cost. He is eventually caught and confronted by his father, who brings him back to Pittsburgh. The clash between Paul's dreams and his actual circumstances leads to a tragic resolution. Confronted with the harsh realities of his actions, Paul feels cornered and defeated, unable to reconcile his desires with the world he must face. The story serves as a cautionary tale, highlighting the consequences of recklessness and the dangers of discontentment. Paul's misguided pursuit of an unattainable life of splendor leads to his downfall, emphasizing the importance of accepting one's circumstances and finding contentment in the present. The narrative explores the clash between youthful dreams and the responsibilities of adulthood, ultimately portraying Paul's escapism as a wrong and futile choice. C. Long questions. 1. How do you interpret Paul's presentation in the principal's office? Normal, abnormal, tricky, indecent? Give reasons. In Paul's case, Paul's presentation in the principal's office can be interpreted as abnormal and tricky, with elements of indecency. Paul's behavior in this scene stands out as peculiar and manipulative, driven by his desire to escape his current reality and indulge in a life of extravagance and grandeur. Firstly, Paul's demeanor in the principal's office is strikingly different from what one would expect from a typical student. He appears nonchalant and unapologetic, showing no remorse for his actions. Instead of feeling guilty or ashamed of his deceitful behavior, Paul seems almost proud of his actions, confident that he has outsmarted the adults around him. Secondly, Paul's elaborate lies and deceptions to justify his behavior are indicative of a tricky and cunning personality. He spins a web of stories, claiming that the flowers he purchased were for a girl who had recently died, and that he needed to attend the symphony to honor her memory. This manipulation of emotions and exploitation of tragic events to serve his own desires display his lack of empathy and disregard for the feelings of others. Moreover, Paul's extravagant and reckless spending of money, which he stole from his employer, further highlights his indecent and unethical behavior. He shows no consideration for the consequences of his actions, both on himself and others, and seems solely focused on fulfilling his extravagant fantasies. Overall, Paul's presentation in the principal's office is abnormal because it showcases a young man who is detached from reality and consumed by his own desires. His behavior is tricky, as he weaves complex lies to evade responsibility, and it is indecent because he is willing to exploit others and engage in unethical actions to attain his extravagant lifestyle. His presentation ultimately reflects a troubled and discontented soul, searching for an escape from the constraints of his ordinary life, regardless of the consequences. 2. Suppose you are Paul and you are living in Pittsburgh at the beginning of the 20th century. Write a monologue explaining what the world around you is like and what you really want to do. Include why the school, home, society, and church give you a kind of burden. You know, living in Pittsburgh in the early 20th century is like being trapped in a cage of expectations, and I'm desperate to break free. The world around me feels suffocating, with school, home, society, and even the church placing burdens on my shoulders that I can barely bear. At school, they expect me to conform to this rigid structure of education. It's all about memorizing facts and figures, regurgitating information without truly understanding it. But I want more than that. I crave knowledge that goes beyond textbooks, a learning that's alive and meaningful. The pressure to excel in exams, to maintain high grades, it's a heavy weight on my mind and soul. I want to explore the world, to understand its complexities, and to learn from real experiences, not just from the pages of a textbook. And then there's home. My parents, they mean well, but they have these dreams for me that I'm not sure I share. They want me to continue their legacy, to follow in their footsteps, but what if my dreams are different? What if my heart yearns for something beyond their expectations? The burden of fulfilling their hopes for me leaves me feeling torn between their love and my own desires. Society, oh society, it's like this sea of judgment and conformity. There are unwritten rules that I'm supposed to follow, roles that I'm expected to fit into. But I can't help but feel like an outsider. I don't want to be just another face in the crowd, another cog in the machine. I long to be authentic, to embrace my uniqueness and stand out from the crowd. But the pressure to conform, to fit in, it's stifling. Even the church, a place that's meant to offer solace and understanding, adds to my burden. They have their set of beliefs and rules, and I'm full of questions, doubts. I want my faith to be a personal journey, a connection to something greater, but sometimes it feels like I'm suffocating under the weight of their dogma. What I really want is freedom. Freedom to explore, to dream, to be myself without judgment or expectations. I yearn to chase my own passions, to discover my true self, and to forge my own path in this world. I want to break away from the chains of conformity and embrace my individuality. In my heart, I know that true happiness lies in being true to myself, in following my own path, even if it means facing resistance and criticism. I want a world that celebrates uniqueness, that encourages each person to be their authentic self. So, amidst all these burdens, my dream is to fly free, to break through the barriers and live a life that feels true to me. I want to soar beyond the expectations of school, home, society, and even the church, and find my own place in this vast world. I'm determined to pursue my dreams, to carve out my own destiny, and to finally breathe freely in a world that embraces individuality and celebrates the spirit of each unique soul. 3. Who do you think responsible for Paul's bad case? His upbringing, American schooling, American society, his mental shortcomings, his peer group? Paul's bad case can be attributed to a combination of factors, and it's important to recognize that it's not just one single cause that led to his situation. The responsibility is shared among various elements in his life. A. Upbringing. Paul's parents and home environment played a role in shaping his values and aspirations. Their narrow view of success and expectations for him to conform to societal norms influenced his desire for extravagance, and a life beyond his means. However, it's essential to remember that parents can only guide to a certain extent, and children have their own agency and choices. B. American schooling. The rigid and conventional education system in early 20th century America also contributed to Paul's dissatisfaction. The emphasis on memorization and conformity stifled his creativity and individuality. The lack of opportunities to explore his passions and interests within the educational setting could have left him feeling unfulfilled. C. American society. The society of the time placed significant importance on material success and the pursuit of wealth. Paul was exposed to this materialistic culture, which may have fueled his desire for a grand lifestyle. The pressure to keep up appearances and achieve the American dream could have added to his sense of burden. D. His mental shortcomings. Paul's own mental state and vulnerabilities, such as his desire for admiration and his belief that he was different from others, contributed to his choices and actions. His inability to cope with the challenges and disappointments he faced also played a role in his downward spiral. E. His peer group. Paul's association with a wild and carefree crowd, like the San Francisco boy he met, encouraged his reckless behavior. Peer pressure and the desire to fit in with a certain group could have pushed him further into a world of extravagance and deception. It's important to recognize that while external factors played a role in Paul's downfall, individuals have their own agency and choices in how they respond to circumstances. Paul had the ability to make different choices, seek help, or change his path, but he succumbed to his desires and fantasies, leading to the tragic consequences of his actions. Ultimately, Paul's case is a complex interplay of various factors, and it serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of succumbing to unrealistic dreams and desires without considering the real-world implications. 4. After reading the story, what kinds of similarities and differences do you find in Pittsburgh and New York? After all, why did Paul choose New York? After reading the story, several similarities and differences can be observed between Pittsburgh and New York. Similarities. A. Urban environment. Both Pittsburgh and New York are bustling cities with a fast-paced urban lifestyle. They offer opportunities for people seeking excitement and adventure. B. Social pressure. In both cities, there is a certain level of social pressure to conform to societal norms and expectations. This pressure may influence individuals like Paul to seek validation and recognition through material possessions and extravagant displays. C. Materialistic culture. Both cities are influenced by the materialistic culture of the early 20th century America, where success and wealth are highly valued. D. Access to luxury. While New York may have more lavish opportunities, both cities offer access to luxury and extravagance that can allure someone like Paul, who craves a grand lifestyle. Differences. A. Size and scope. New York is a much larger and cosmopolitan city compared to Pittsburgh. It is the epicenter of art, culture, and finance, offering a wider range of experiences and opportunities. B. Diversity. New York is known for its diversity and multiculturalism, which provides a vibrant atmosphere with a melting pot of people and ideas. Pittsburgh, though diverse, may not have the same level of cultural richness. C. Social scene. New York has a more sophisticated and glamorous social scene, attracting artists, actors, and wealthy individuals. This aspect would appeal to Paul's desire to be associated with high society. D. Theatrical opportunities. New York is renowned for its theaters and performing arts, making it an attractive destination for someone like Paul, who is enamored with the world of the arts. Paul chose New York because it represented the epitome of everything he yearned for: luxury, extravagance, and a life of splendor. New York's allure lay in the vast opportunities it provided for him to fulfill his fantasies and aspirations. As a city known for its grand theaters, fashionable social circles, and a vibrant lifestyle, New York held the promise of the life Paul desired. He believed that by immersing himself in the cultural capital of the country, he could escape the burdens of his ordinary life in Pittsburgh and become the exceptional person he yearned to be. However, Paul's inability to separate reality from his illusions ultimately led to his downfall and tragic end in the city he thought would set him free. 5. Do you think consumerist attitude of the society is responsible for Paul's case? Why or why not? Yes, the consumerist attitude of society played a significant role in Paul's case. The story of Paul's case explores the destructive effects of materialism and the relentless pursuit of wealth, luxury, and social status. A. Shallow values. The society in which Paul lives places a high value on material possessions, wealth, and social status. This consumerist attitude promotes the idea that one's worth is defined by what they own and how they are perceived by others. This shallow value system influences Paul to desire a life of extravagance and grandeur, even if it means resorting to deceit and theft to achieve it. B. Desire for recognition. Paul's consumerist attitude is driven by his desire for recognition and admiration from others. He believes that by surrounding himself with luxury and associating with the upper class, he will gain the admiration and respect he craves. The societal emphasis on status and appearance fuels his yearning for a grander life. C. Escapism. The consumerist society offers the allure of escapism from one's ordinary life. For Paul, his mundane existence in Pittsburgh becomes burdensome, and he sees New York as the place where he can escape his reality and immerse himself in a world of luxury and opulence. D. Lack of genuine connection. Paul's consumerist attitude drives him to prioritize material possessions and social status over genuine human connections. He uses his wealth and extravagance as a facade to mask his inner emptiness and lack of meaningful relationships. E. Trapped in illusions. The consumerist society perpetuates the idea that material wealth and success will bring happiness and fulfillment. However, as Paul discovers, his pursuit of these external symbols of success only leads him deeper into a world of illusions, further alienating him from reality and genuine happiness. In conclusion, the consumerist attitude of society in Paul's case plays a central role in the character's downfall. Paul's obsession with material possessions, luxury, and status drives him to make reckless decisions and leads him to a tragic end. The story serves as a cautionary tale, warning against the dangers of prioritizing materialism over genuine human connections and inner fulfillment. Best of luck.